I woke up in the hospital and realized my wife had emptied our account while I was unconscious. My name is Cameron Doyle. I'm 45 years old and have spent 22 years behind the wheel of a semi. Not the glamorous life, but it paid the bills and kept Dana in the lifestyle she never appreciated. I'd been feeling that tightness in my chest for weeks. Just stress, I told myself. Long hours and bad roadside coffee. Until I couldn't ignore it anymore. Somewhere outside Omaha, the pain got so bad I had to pull over. I called 911 myself. They airlifted me to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Turned out it wasn't a panic attack. My heart was shutting down. I remember the doctor's face before everything went black. "We're losing him," she said. "Not exactly what you want to hear right before you pass out." 2 days later, I woke up with tubes in my arms and a stent in my heart. The nurse told me I'd flatlined twice. Said I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky when I checked my phone. There was only one message from Dana. We'd been married 15 years. No kids, just a mortgage in Sioux Falls and a lot of quiet dinners when I was home between hauls. The message had a screenshot of our joint account. Balance, $0.00. Below it, she wrote, "I deserve this after everything I've done for you. $61,438.72. My emergency fund, my truck maintenance account, my retirement cushion, all gone." I should have felt something. Rage, maybe. Instead, I just felt tired. Tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. I sent her a thumbs up emoji, nothing else. When the doctor came in, he told me I needed to rest. Avoid stress. No driving for at least 6 weeks. He asked if someone was picking me up tomorrow. Yeah, I lied. That night I made a call to my brother Jeff. He lived on the other side of town, hadn't spoken to him in months. Not because we were fighting, just different lives. "Need a favor," I said. "Name it," he answered. "Need a place to crash for a few days. And I need you not to tell Dana." There was a pause. "She doesn't know you're alive?" "Oh, she knows," I said. "She just doesn't know I'm not coming home." Jeff helped me into his guest room. He's a construction foreman, divorced twice, knows something about the ways people can disappoint you. "You should eat something," he said. I wasn't hungry. I was thinking. About the house I'd bought. About the refinancing I'd done 3 months earlier when rates dropped. Dana had said she was too busy to come to the signing, so I handled it myself. Put it only in my name since my credit score was better. She never even asked to see the paperwork. There was also the medical power of attorney I'd set up after my cousin's accident. Gave Jeff authority if anything ever happened to me. Dana never noticed it wasn't her name on the form. She'd skimmed the paperwork, said, "As long as you're covered." What she didn't know was that I was covered, that is. Thoroughly. And she? She was about to learn that taking what isn't yours has consequences. But what happened next, I couldn't have imagined, not even in my worst-case scenarios. I spent the first week at Jeff's house in silence. No TV, no calls. Just the quiet hum of his refrigerator and the occasional creak from the floorboards at night. My chest still ached if I moved too fast, but I was healing. Slowly. Jeff left me alone most days, working his job and checking in only when needed. That suited me fine. I needed space to think. Dana hadn't tried to call. Not once. She must have assumed I was either too broken to fight back or too weak to care. That suited me even better. By the 8th day, I felt strong enough to open my laptop. I began with the basics, checking the damage. I had 3 accounts Dana didn't know about, used mostly for long-haul expenses and side gigs. She hadn't touched those. Good. I changed the passwords anyway. Then I logged into our joint mortgage portal. As expected, still under my name only. I'd made sure of that during the refinance. Next, I called the county records office to confirm the title, my name, alone. A small comfort, but it would matter later. I wasn't ready to act. Not yet. First, I needed to understand the full scope of what she'd done. I reached out to my credit monitoring service. A few new inquiries on my file, department store card, a personal loan, all within the past week. She was building a new life with my name still tethered to hers. That would change. That night, I lay awake replaying the last few months. The little things I'd ignored. Her sudden interest in spa weekends. Her gym bag packed tighter than seemed reasonable. That yoga retreat she took in February, wasn't that the same weekend I noticed the missing checkbook? I hadn't said anything at the time. Didn't want to be the suspicious husband. Foolish. On the 12th day, I drove for the first time since the surgery. Just to the bank. I didn't go to the branch Dana favored. I went to the one on the west side, near the trucking depot. The manager there knew me, helped me set up my small business account years ago. She remembered. I'm filing a dispute on a withdrawal, I said, calmly placing the paperwork down. I had printed the account activity, highlighted the transfers Dana made, and brought copies of the power of attorney documents, just in case. The account was drained while I was in the hospital. I was unconscious. She didn't ask questions. Just scanned the paperwork and nodded. The bank's fraud department would open an investigation. It was a start. Not a solution, but a foundation. At Jeff's that evening, I found a small box in the closet. Dana's keepsakes. Photos, notes, a charm bracelet from our first anniversary. I'd moved it when we were painting the bedroom last fall and forgotten to put it back. I didn't open it. Just stared at it. That part of my life felt distant now. Archived. Like a book closed for good. A week later, a certified letter arrived. Dana's attorney. She was filing for divorce. Grounds, irreconcilable differences. She requested an equitable split of assets. Half the house. Half the truck. Alimony. I read it 3 times. There was no mention of the money she had taken. No acknowledgement. No apology. I didn't call her. I didn't call the attorney either. Instead, I drafted a timeline. The hospital records. The bank withdrawals. The property documents. The power of attorney. Everything that showed she had acted while I was incapacitated. I wasn't planning to argue with her in court. I was going to let the documents do that for me. The next morning, I called a friend. Russell. Old high school buddy turned family lawyer. We hadn't spoken in years, but he answered on the second ring. Need help, I said. It's about Dana. His response was measured. Tell me everything. That was the first stab in the back. But the real blow was still ahead. Russell worked fast. That's what made him good. He listened more than he spoke, and when he asked questions, they were the kind that made you pause. By the end of our first meeting, he had a plan sketched out across 2 pages of legal pad. Nothing aggressive. Just methodical. Measured. Legal. While he prepared the response to Dana's petition, I focused on building my case. Not in anger, not to punish her, but to protect myself. To make sure no one could say I'd left things to chance. Every document I touched, I copied. Every interaction, I logged. It became my new routine. I pulled my credit report from all 3 agencies. There were 2 more accounts I didn't recognize. One was a retail card opened in my name but used only once. The other was more troubling, a credit line with a small lender I'd never heard of. I called them. The loan had been issued 3 days after my surgery. Application completed online. IP address traced to our home. I requested the application packet. It arrived a few days later, postmarked with Dana's return address. My signature had been forged. Not poorly, not obviously. But not mine. I added it to the growing folder of evidence. I found an email thread on our shared account, one she apparently forgot to delete. A realtor had sent her listings. Condos in Scottsdale. A few with pools. One with a yoga studio on site. The messages were all dated while I was still in recovery. In the evenings, when Jeff got home from work, we'd eat in silence. He never pushed, never pried. But one night, he looked over his beer and said, "You're not just gonna let her walk with it, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm just walking slower than she thinks." The next day, I visited our old storage unit. The lease was in my name. I'd used it mostly for off-season gear, tools, spare tires. But Dana had stored a few things there too, boxes of paperwork, old photo albums, decorations we hadn't touched since 2016. One of the boxes held a folder labeled, Personal Finance. Inside were handwritten notes. Budgets. Account numbers. Passwords. Some were outdated. Others weren't. A spreadsheet listed asset values and potential sale prices. Another listed alimony projections based on state guidelines. She'd been planning longer than I'd thought. I didn't take the folder. I photographed every page with my phone, then placed it exactly as I'd found it. There was no reason to tip my hand. I made a second stop that afternoon, our old neighbor, Cynthia. We'd spoken only a handful of times over the years, but she was sharp, observant. I asked her if she'd noticed anything unusual around the time of my surgery. She hesitated. "There was a man," she said. "Younger. Tall. Used to visit when you were on the road. I thought maybe it was family. But he parked around the corner. Never came inside until Dana opened the garage door. Did he come by while I was in the hospital?" "Twice that I saw. One morning he left with 2 suitcases. The next day, he was back with flowers. I thanked her and left. That was more than enough. Back at Jeff's, I documented everything. The forged loan. The photos. Cynthia's statement. I printed the photos from the storage unit, highlighting the discrepancies in budget timelines. Then I cross-referenced them with the withdrawals Dana made. The overlap was uncanny. She hadn't panicked. She'd executed. Russell called later that night. He'd reviewed the preliminary findings. "We have enough to petition for fraud and asset concealment," he said. "You want to move forward?" "Yes." Quietly. He understood. Some fights aren't won by shouting. They're won by being first to the courthouse, by having your paperwork in order, by never losing your temper. But what I found next changed everything. It began with a return envelope from the Department of Revenue. Standard government issue, nothing flashy. I assumed it was an update on the fraud petition or a copy of recent filings. Instead, it was a notification of business registration. A limited liability company had been formed in both our names, dated 2 weeks before my heart attack. I had never signed any such form. The registered address was our home. The business name, Doyle Wellness Solutions, LLC. I stared at the paper for several minutes before reading it again. Dana had used my name to start a business. Not after I was incapacitated, but before. It wasn't just opportunism. It was premeditation. A second envelope arrived the next day. This one from a payment processor. It congratulated us on our successful application and included login credentials. I accessed the account. There were already 5 transactions, each labeled consultation fee, each for $600, each within days of my surgery. I dug deeper. Through Russell, I subpoenaed the application packet from the Secretary of State's office. They mailed over copies of the business registration. Her handwriting was there again. My name forged, cleanly but unmistakably. What disturbed me more was the listed business purpose: health consulting, personal wellness management. That was her world, not mine. Her yoga retreats. Her influencer circle. She had started building a brand using my name and credit while waiting for me to collapse. This wasn't about ending a marriage. This was a hostile takeover. That evening, I reviewed all our financial statements from the past year. I'd always handled the bills, but Dana had taken over a few responsibilities while I was on the road. At the time, it seemed practical. I now saw it for what it was: a strategic transition. Several small transfers stood out. Always under $2,000. Frequent, but spaced apart. Each routed through different merchant names, often for services I didn't recognize. Wellness retreats. Coaching services. Equipment rentals. One payment went to an address in Arizona, Sedona, where she'd once claimed to attend a seminar. I called Russell. "She's laundering the money," I said. "Through a business that doesn't exist, in my name." He didn't ask how I knew. He just asked me to email everything. The next week was a blur of documentation. I filed a formal fraud complaint with the state. Russell amended the divorce response to include criminal allegations. We requested a court injunction to freeze any assets tied to the LLC. A judge signed it within 48 hours. Meanwhile, Dana's attorney sent a sharply worded letter demanding the return of a laptop and several personal effects. I checked the list. The laptop in question was mine. Bought under my business account, loaded with tax records and route schedules. Russell drafted a reply that said, in essence, "Return will be considered pending resolution of fraud investigation." Nothing else was said. One night, Jeff came home and found me still in front of the computer, surrounded by open files. He didn't speak. Just handed me a fresh cup of coffee and sat on the other couch. After a long silence, he said, "I've seen bad breakups. But this? This is calculated." I nodded. She didn't just leave. She set the building on fire and locked the exits. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. We both knew the battle lines had already been drawn. But now I held the map. The last document I reviewed before bed was a PDF of social media posts. Dana had launched a branded account the same week I was hospitalized. Inspirational quotes, filtered photos of green smoothies, testimonials from clients whose names I didn't recognize. It was polished. Professionally done. The kind of thing that takes time and planning. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. I started by cutting off access. Quietly, systematically. First, I changed the passwords to every shared account still bearing my name. Then I reviewed the access history, IP logs, device names, timestamps. She had been logging in from the same MacBook, the one she was now demanding I return. It was simple enough to disable her credentials and log the event. Every step recorded, every keystroke measured. Next, I compiled the financial impact. Russell and I tallied every unauthorized transaction, every forged document, every asset Dana had touched under false pretenses. The total approached 6 figures. More than just theft, it was fraud, and not the kind that gets brushed aside in family court. I instructed Russell to initiate discovery proceedings against the LLC. We demanded all records, client communications, financial statements, tax filings. If she failed to produce them, we'd petition for default judgment. If she complied, we'd analyze every byte. While Russell worked the legal angles, I contacted a forensic accountant. A former client. I'd helped his firm streamline logistics 5 years ago, and he hadn't forgotten. He reviewed Dana's transactions, the LLC filings, the payment processors. In 3 days, he sent back a preliminary report. Fraud patterns confirmed. Vendor links traced to shell companies. Some of the testimonials on her website? Fabricated using AI-generated names and stock photos. We prepared a timeline of evidence. Cross-referenced it with medical records, flight data, and withdrawal logs. The story it told was clear: Dana had moved assets, launched a business, and defrauded her spouse, all while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed. I took my next step not in court, but in business. I visited a few of my longtime clients, fleet managers, freight partners, dispatch coordinators. Casual conversations, nothing more. I let them know I was available for consulting. Just a few hours a week to start. Enough to re-establish presence. They were receptive. One even offered me a position outright. "I'm not jumping yet," I said. "Just building options." He nodded. Smart. Back at Jeff's, I began forwarding all mail to a P.O. box. I updated my driver's license, rerouted bills, removed Dana from all emergency contacts. Every step insulated me further from her reach. When she eventually realized what was happening, it would already be too late. We also filed a temporary restraining order to prevent further asset transfers. A judge granted it immediately, citing clear risk of financial harm. Dana's attorney filed a motion to dismiss. It was denied. That week, I moved the contents of our joint safety deposit box to a secured facility. Inside were heirlooms, original copies of titles, my late mother's jewelry. Items Dana had claimed were junk. Now they were out of reach, protected. Finally, I prepared a full briefing document for the court. 76 pages, indexed and footnoted. A narrative not of bitterness, but of calculated survival. The evidence wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. Quiet. Devastating. Dana had built her betrayal with strategy. So had I. But she still had no idea how I would respond. The court date was set for a Monday morning. Cool, gray sky. Fitting, I thought, for what was about to unfold. I arrived early, dressed not for drama but for clarity. A navy suit, conservative tie, leather folio under my arm. Russell met me outside the courthouse, calm as ever, with a nod that said everything was in place. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs. Dana sat with her attorney on the opposite bench, perfectly styled, performative calm. She avoided eye contact. Her lawyer shuffled papers and whispered strategy. But there was tension in her posture. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. When our case was called, I stepped forward and placed the folio on the table. Russell began with a measured summary: dates, discrepancies, forged applications, unauthorized transactions. He spoke plainly, letting the facts do the work. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for thoroughness, listened without interruption. When it was Dana's turn, her attorney launched into a defense based on miscommunication and shared responsibility. He framed her actions as careless, not criminal. She hadn't meant harm. She thought the money was available. She believed I had consented to the LLC. Russell waited until the judge looked up, then he handed over the documentation packet. Medical records. Transaction timestamps. Photographs of forged signatures. Affidavits from the bank, the accountant, even our neighbor Cynthia. A narrative so clean, so cold in its precision, it silenced the room. Then came the moment. Russell presented the social media evidence. Dana's wellness brand launch, time-stamped posts from the week I was hospitalized, marketing copy claiming a co-founded enterprise. The judge skimmed the screenshots, then looked directly at Dana. "You published this while your husband was recovering from a cardiac event?" Dana shifted. Her voice wavered when she spoke, carefully choosing her words. I wasn't sure if he would recover. The judge nodded slowly. And your first instinct was to use his name and financial identity to establish a wellness consultancy? Dana's lawyer objected, but the judge waved it off. I'm not asking for argument. I'm asking for understanding. Silence settled again. I'll need a recess, the judge said. To review the financial declarations and the forensic report. We stood. I didn't glance at Dana. There was no satisfaction in her discomfort. Only validation that the quiet route had been the correct one. In the hallway, Russell leaned against the marble wall, arms crossed. She thought she could run this like a brand launch. I nodded. But it was an audit. When court resumed, the tone had changed. The judge ruled to freeze all accounts associated with Dana's LLC pending a full investigation. She referred the case to the district attorney for potential fraud prosecution. Spousal support was denied. Property division was frozen. Dana's attorney requested a continuance. It was granted, but with restrictions. As we left the courtroom, Dana finally looked at me. Her expression wasn't angry. It was lost. Like a CEO who just discovered the books had been wrong all along. And you won't believe who else was involved. The court date was set for a Monday morning. Cool, gray sky. Fitting, I thought, for what was about to unfold. I arrived early, dressed not for drama but for clarity. A navy suit, conservative tie, leather folio under my arm. Russell met me outside the courthouse, calm as ever, with a nod that said everything was in place. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs. Dana sat with her attorney on the opposite bench, perfectly styled, performative calm. She avoided eye contact. Her lawyer shuffled papers and whispered strategy. But there was tension in her posture. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. When our case was called, I stepped forward and placed the folio on the table. Russell began with a measured summary: dates, discrepancies, forged applications, unauthorized transactions. He spoke plainly, letting the facts do the work. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for thoroughness, listened without interruption. When it was Dana's turn, her attorney launched into a defense based on miscommunication and shared responsibility. He framed her actions as careless, not criminal. She hadn't meant harm. She thought the money was available. She believed I had consented to the LLC. Russell waited until the judge looked up, then he handed over the documentation packet. Medical records. Transaction timestamps. Photographs of forged signatures. Affidavits from the bank, the accountant, even our neighbor Cynthia. A narrative so clean, so cold in its precision, it silenced the room. Then came the moment. Russell presented the social media evidence. Dana's wellness brand launch, time-stamped posts from the week I was hospitalized, marketing copy claiming a co-founded enterprise. The judge skimmed the screenshots, then looked directly at Dana. You published this while your husband was recovering from a cardiac event? Dana shifted. Her voice wavered when she spoke, carefully choosing her words. I wasn't sure if he would recover. The judge nodded slowly. And your first instinct was to use his name and financial identity to establish a wellness consultancy? Dana's lawyer objected, but the judge waved it off. I'm not asking for argument. I'm asking for understanding. Silence settled again. I'll need a recess, the judge said. To review the financial declarations and the forensic report. We stood. I didn't glance at Dana. There was no satisfaction in her discomfort. Only validation that the quiet route had been the correct one. In the hallway, Russell leaned against the marble wall, arms crossed. She thought she could run this like a brand launch. I nodded. But it was an audit. When court resumed, the tone had changed. The judge ruled to freeze all accounts associated with Dana's LLC pending a full investigation. She referred the case to the district attorney for potential fraud prosecution. Spousal support was denied. Property division was frozen. Dana's attorney requested a continuance. It was granted, but with restrictions. As we left the courtroom, Dana finally looked at me. Her expression wasn't angry. It was lost. Like a CEO who just discovered the books had been wrong all along. And you won't believe who else was involved. The week after the hearing, I received a call from the district attorney's office. A routine follow-up turned into something else. The voice on the other end asked me to verify a name, Lillian Carter. I paused. She's Dana's business partner, I said. Why? She's also your bank's regional operations manager. I didn't respond immediately. Lillian. I remembered her now. Polished, polite. She'd approved the mortgage refinance. Handled our account questions. Friendly with Dana. The DA's office uncovered a pattern: favorable processing times, missing verification protocols, approvals bypassing typical security reviews. A quiet partnership that had enabled Dana's access and movements. It went deeper than I imagined. Fraud had an accomplice. When I told Russell, he said only, "They've just made this a federal case." I never confronted Dana. There was no point. The damage was documented, the course already set. My task now was simple: follow through. I transferred my accounts to a credit union. Sold the truck. Settled my affairs. The house went on the market, quietly. I had no interest in holding on to anything tied to her. Dana's social media accounts went silent. The brand she tried to build eroded under the weight of subpoenas and unfulfilled services. The court ordered restitution. She faced charges. Her partner resigned under investigation. I resumed work part-time, slowly rebuilding. Not out of necessity, but purpose. Routine. Momentum. At Jeff's, the guest room stayed neat, untouched by bitterness. We didn't speak of her anymore. Some things deserve only silence. I kept the leather folio. Not as a memento, but as a reminder. Of what happens when you're prepared. Of what dignity looks like under pressure. Subscribe if you want more stories where men don't scream, they act. Coldly. Completely.